The Galactic Academy's Xenoarchaeology lecture hall hummed with the usual mix of translated languages and curious chittering. Professor Krelthers, a distinguished Vexorian scholar with iridescent scales that shimmered under the artificial lights, stood before a massive holographic display showcasing weapons from 100 extinct civilizations. Today, Krelthers announced, his voice carrying the weight of academic authority, we examine the martial implements of species long vanished from the cosmos. These artifacts tell us much about their creators' physiology, culture, and ultimately, their downfall. Natalie Chen sat in the third row, her datapad balanced on her knee, stylus moving in quick strokes as she took notes. She was one of only 3 humans in the entire academia, institution that drew students from 47 different species across known space. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes tracked the holographic projections with keen interest. Vincent Torres occupied the seat beside her, his broad frame somehow managing to look relaxed despite the chair being designed for species with entirely different anatomical requirements. He'd stopped taking notes 10 minutes ago, instead watching the weapon displays with an expression that Natalie had learned to recognize, barely suppressed amusement. This, Professor Krelthers gestured with 3 of his 6 manipulator appendages, is a Vexarian bladestaff. Note the elegant curvature, the balance point precisely calculated for their triple-jointed limbs, a masterwork of extinct craftsmanship. The hologram rotated slowly, displaying every angle of the weapon. It was beautiful crystalline metal formed into sweeping curves that caught and refracted light like frozen music. Vincent snorted. The sound carried in the quiet lecture hall. Several Katona's heads turned. Professor Krelthers' primary eyes swiveled toward the interruption. Mr. Torres, you find the Vexarian martial tradition amusing? No, sir, Vincent said, though his grin suggested otherwise. It's just ... that grip angle. Nobody's holding that for more than 5 minutes without their wrist cramping up, and that's assuming you don't accidentally slice your own forearm open every time you swing it. A ripple of confused murmuring spread through the class. Natalie felt her own eyebrows rise. She looked back at the hologram, mentally trying to imagine actually gripping the weapon. Vincent was right. The handle sat at an angle that would force any humanoid wrist into an awkward position, and those decorative curves near the grip, they'd be touching bare flesh with every movement of a blade designed for cutting. Professor Krelthers' scales rippled the Vexorian equivalent of a frown. The Vexarians were renowned warriors. Their weapons are studied across the galaxy. I'm sure they were, Vincent said, standing up. Can you make that hologram solid, like haptic projection? The professor hesitated, then gestured to his teaching assistant, a small prelian whose tentacles danced over the control panel. The hologram shimmered, gaining substance and weight. Vincent walked down to the front of the hall, and Natalie found herself standing too, following him. This was going to be good. He picked up the bladestaff, hefted it once, then attempted a basic swing. His wrist twisted awkwardly, his face grimaced, and sure enough, one of those decorative curves scraped along his forearm. He set it down carefully. Okay, now this one. He pointed to another weapon in the display, a Corthon warhammer with a handle that spiraled like a twisted rope. I'm guessing that's supposed to improve grip. The professor nodded slowly, clearly uncertain where this was heading. Vincent had the assistant materialize that one too. He gripped it, tried to swing it, and nearly dropped it as the spiral pattern provided no secure purchase at all. Yeah, that's going to fly out of your hand the first time you hit something solid. Probably take out your own squadmate. The Corthon Empire lasted 6,000 years, the professor said stiffly. Maybe they were really good at dodging their own weapons. Vincent replied. A Jurel student in the front row made a sound like water gurgling through pipes, their species' version of laughter. Others were starting to look at the weapons display differently now. Seeing what the humans saw, Natalie stepped forward, pointing at an elegant double-bladed spear from the Menax civilization. That center grip, there's no handguard at all, and the blades are positioned so that any thrust would bring your forward hand right into the striking zone of an opponent's weapon. The Menax were a proud warrior culture. Professor Krelthers began, who probably lost a lot of fingers. Natalie finished. She picked up the materialized spear, demonstrated the problem, and set it back down. Look, I'm not saying these species weren't dangerous or didn't have warrior traditions. I'm saying these specific weapons are badly designed for actual combat. Vincent was already moving to the next display. This Hulvan sword, beautiful, sure, but the pummel weight is completely wrong. You'd tire out in minutes. And this Zen rifle, the trigger placement means you're either shooting with your thumb or dislocating your finger. He went down the line, pointing out flaw after flaw that became obvious once mentioned. The balance was wrong. The grip was wrong. The sight lines were blocked. The weight distribution would cause fatigue. The materials would shatter on impact. The ammunition feed would jam. These weren't ancient weapons, Natalie realized. These were ancient ceremonial objects. Parade decorations, or the equivalent of fantasy. Mole ninja gear from species who thought they looked cool but had never actually used them in real combat. Professor Krelther's scales had gone completely flat, a sign of deep discomfort and vex. These artifacts have been authenticated by the most respected xenarchaeologists in the galaxy. They were found in military contexts, warriors' tombs, battlefield sites. Yeah, Vincent said gently, his tone more sympathetic now. But that doesn't mean they were good weapons. Earth's history is full of ceremonial swords and decorative armor that looked impressive but would get you killed in actual combat. We've got museum pieces from 100 different cultures that were more about status than survival. A Krell student, one of the massive, rock-like beings from the Andromeda sector, spoke up in a voice like grinding stones. But the humans, your species, survived. You reached the stars. Your military history is— She paused, searching for words. Extensive. Unfortunately. Yeah, Natalie said. We've had a lot of practice, thousands of years of nearly constant warfare across every continent. We learned pretty quick what works and what gets you killed. Vincent picked up what looked like a ceremonial axe from the Prel civilization, its handle carved with intricate designs that left no smooth gripping surface. When your survival depends on your weapon, you don't design for beauty first. You design for function, for reliability, for the simple fact that you need to be able to hold the damn thing for hours if necessary without losing your grip or your strength. He set it down carefully. These civilizations are extinct, right? Maybe some of them spent too much time making their weapons look impressive and not enough time making them work. The lecture hall had gone completely silent. Even Professor Krelther seemed at a loss for words. Natalie walked back to her seat, Vincent following. As they sat down, she leaned over and whispered, "You just deconstructed a semester's worth of his research. Probably shouldn't have done that," Vincent whispered back, looking slightly guilty. But around them, students were beginning to murmur, to question, to look at the ancient weapons with new eyes. The Jurel student raised a "Professor, if these weapons were ceremonial or decorative, what would actual combat weapons from these species have looked like?" Professor Krelthus was quiet for a long moment. Then his scales began to shift through colors, the Vexorian equivalent of thoughtful consideration. "That," he said slowly, "is an excellent question, one that perhaps we should have been asking all along." He looked at Natalie and Vincent. "Humans, your species' rather unfortunate expertise in warfare appears to provide a perspective we've been lacking. Perhaps you would both be willing to assist in a re-evaluation of our collection." Natalie and Vincent exchanged glances. Then they nodded. Sometimes, she thought, being the species that was uncomfortably good at violence had its uses. Even in a classroom full of scholars studying the ghosts of dead civilizations, the practical, brutal knowledge of what actually worked in combat cut through centuries of academic assumption. The weapons of extinct species told stories. Yes, but maybe not the stories everyone had been reading.